Okay, hello everybody. I know it's been a while since I've been here on YouTube, and I just wanted to share with you some things that I've been working on and some timelines and things. We have I put together a little slideshow. God put in the Bible different cycles of time. And this can give us like a bracket of time to watch for, to know if we're at least in the end times, or if we have, if we have hundreds of years left. So that's what this video is going to be about, this slideshow that I've prepared. The first obvious timeline that almost anybody who studied prophecy will recognize is the Sabbaths. And this cycle of time is simply every 7 years. Every 7 years there's a Sabbath. And what I was studying in the book Bible Chronology by Adam Rutherford, I noted that here at the bottom. See that? On page 498 there's this chart. And this chart was very inspirational to me because I was thinking the prophet Daniel gave us like 70 weeks as a type or a pattern. It's basically 490 years. If you're not familiar with it, each day equals a year, and it's a 490 year period. And I'm just gonna put my phone on silent. Okay, so I am gonna check my YouTube channel just to make sure I don't think there's any, I haven't been on here forever, so there's probably nobody chatting. But I don't know, I think this is a good time for me to do it. Maybe I'll start doing it every Thursday night. But anyway, this timeline that I'm showing here, this was very inspirational to me. It is 70 weeks or 490 years. So it's broken down, according to Adam Rutherford, it's an actual 490 year period where it started in the spring of 458 BC and it ended in spring of 33 AD. Now he's an excellent Bible chronologer, so I really trust these timelines that he's given here. But the important thing is that we have a pattern that can, and well, when you're studying prophecy, God is using this pattern of sevens. If you think of it as every 7 years, it's easier. It's just a clock that ticks off every 7 years. It can be applied to a greater scale, and let me show you how. Okay, so if you have studied any of my older videos, I really like to study the Septuagint. And I was studying the Septuagint, and particularly this verse, Daniel 9:27. And if you notice, this is significantly longer than the Masoretic normal book of Daniel that most people are used to. It has different sections of time in there, and in the red box I have this whole sentence is not even in the book of Daniel in any version, pretty much any version but the Septuagint, the old Greek version of Daniel. So this sentence says, and at the end of the appointed times, after 7 periods of 70 appointed times. So an appointed time was 70 weeks. So what this is saying is that there were 7 periods of those 70 weeks. And when you read this in the Greek, which there is like a Greek manuscript or a Greek interlinear you can get, maybe I could put it in the description. There's a couple different ones that interpret this differently, but basically it's 7 somethings of 70 appointed times. So what that would mean is this is like 3,000 years, this time period. It's basically 7 times 490. So that time period would be 7 periods of 70 weeks. So basically you take the 490 years and you multiply it by 7. So when you do that, you basically come up with a 3,430 year time period. That's a very long time period to study. And it is basically a 7-year cycle that brings us every 7 years. You'll hear a lot of people today looking at the 7-year cycle, but their 7-year cycle is a little bit different than this one, meaning it's not at the exact same year point. They start at a different point, basically. I'm starting at the Exodus. So if you look down here, it says Exodus/Jordan, 49 years. So after the Exodus, they went into the Promised Land. They crossed over the Jordan, and then they split up the land to the remaining tribes of Israel. That was about 49 years that took. So if you start at that point, it's the beginning point of this time period, the 3,430 years, depending on what year you exactly put here, it brings you to basically our time period that we live in within about 5 years of the year it is this year, which is 2022. And I say within. I'm not giving an exact date. I'm giving you a time period to study. So if you study Bible chronology, you can look at this date and you can come up with a year by simply adding 3,430 years. Now, when you're crossing over into Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, there is no year 0. So you either have to subtract a year from the Anno Domini date, or you have to subtract a year from the BC date, and that'll give you the total period of time that you're calculating. So like, let's say you're counting from, I'm going to do it on my calculator real quick. Let's say I'm calculating from 1406 BC, okay? And I'm going to say 3,430 years minus 1406. So instead of saying 1406 BC, I'm going to say 1405. Why? Because there's no year 0. So whenever you're doing a calculation from BC to AD, and you want like a total period of years, make sure you subtract 1 from either date, either the BC date or the AD date, and that'll give you the total number of years. So this is exciting because, again, this is applying the Septuagint timeline of 7 periods of 70 appointed times, as you can see down here. Now, that really gives us a really interesting date prophetically that is future of this year. But also we have another cycle of time, and I'm calling this part 2, the 2300 days. This also gives us another future date. And what's interesting is it aligns with the 7-year cycle. But these 2300 days, so I'm going to start with the verse where we hear in Daniel about the 2300 days. In Daniel 8:13, then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And then in the next verse it says 2300 days. Okay, and then in verse 19 it says, And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed the end shall be. So he just told him 2300 days, and then he said at the end of it, something more important will happen. So I looked up that word in the last end. It's akarith in Hebrew, akarith. Akarith. It means hindermost, afterpart, end, event. So interpreting that or applying that to the 2300 days, you could say there were 2 parts. There are 2 parts to this 2300 days. You got the 2300 days, and then you've got this last end part of that time period. So that's applying Daniel 8:19. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. Now, here's where it gets exciting. Daniel was given 2,300 days, but it wasn't just days, because elsewhere in Scripture, especially in the book of Numbers, which came before the book of Daniel, a day equaled a year, and a year equaled a day. So if we have 2,300 days, God was giving not just a short 6-year time period to Daniel, he was giving him a 2,300 years. And so when we look at it in the year prophetic, we get a solar lunar cycle. And so with this cycle, Daniel could predict eclipses. So this is like looking at the moon and seeing how long it takes the moon to complete its cycles in a lunar year, and what is the difference. So if you have 2,300 lunar years right here, that's about 2231 solar years. So it's short by 70 years. So when you make this a 2,300 days, when you make it a year period, what you're doing is you're discovering that it's a solar lunar cycle. And it exposes the 70 years of captivity spoken of by the prophet of Jeremiah. So the 70 years is not a random number. It's a prophetic number tacked on to the end of 2,300 years. And what does Jeremiah say? And when the 70 years have been completed, I will take vengeance upon that nation, and I will make them an everlasting destruction. And also it says in Jeremiah 29:10 in the King James, because this is what the Lord said, when the 70 years are about to be completed for Babylon, I will visit you and establish my words upon you to bring your people back to this place. So that is a promise that's supposed to happen at the end, not during the 70 years. It doesn't happen during, it happens at the end. So what we have here is 70 years. We're getting into Cyrus's time. Okay? 70 years, which we just saw, plus a time for building. So the historical example is found in Ezra 1:1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, almost 70 years after the first Jewish captives were taken to Babylon, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might begin to be accomplished. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also into writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem in Judah. Okay, so that's after 70 years. Now they got to build. So there's like 70 years plus, okay? So looking back, what we have here, just guessing, because when you look at how long Cyrus ruled, he ruled about 6 years after the 70. Okay, so there was 70 years in Babylon, and then Cyrus took control, and he sent them back, and he had about 6 more years of rule or reign left. And his point was to build the temple. So when you look at Isaiah 44:28, another reference to Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. Okay, so this is prophetic. Although we are not going to build a physical temple, we don't need a physical temple. And I think that's my next slide. We have, God says in Mark 14:58, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple, the physical one, that is made with hands, and within 3 days, timeline prophetic marker, your ears should perk up, within 3 days, not after 3 days, I will build another made without hands. Well, how do you build a temple without your hands? Because it's us. It's the temple, the body of Christ. So when you see 1 Peter 2:5, you also, as lively stones, you're alive, are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. So now we have a timeline of a physical event that's going to overlay onto our time period that we are living in, where we're going to see a similar thing happening. We're going to see a building being built, basically made out of the body of Christ. So when you look at the timeline again, the 2300 years is characterized by the trampling of the sanctuary. So you're given enough clues in the text when the 2300 years starts. Very simply, it starts with Alexander the Great. And he only lived like 13 years, or ruled, I should say, he only ruled 13 years. So when he died in 323, and the kingdom was divided amongst 4 generals, that's Daniel 11:4. So I didn't put the scripture in there, but I'll put it in there right now. Daniel 11:4 is basically referring to Alexander the Great and his kingdom being divided. Now, one of the 4 generals was Ptolemy II. They fought for like 40 years. So Ptolemy II finally came to the throne, and he ruled over Jerusalem in 283 BC. And that began the, quote, trampling of the city of Jerusalem. So ever since that date, and as you go through the Apocrypha, the Maccabees, you know, the New Testament, Jerusalem has just been a tug of war for territorial control over it. And that's what these 2300 years is signifying. Basically the time of the trampling. And they continue trampling over Jerusalem and struggling and fighting and who's going to control it for 2300 years. I believe that's what that prophecy is actually saying. Okay, so that's basically when it starts. And these historical dates are very, you know, it's easy to get them wrong. It's easy to get them wrong. So you kind of have to guess. You kind of have to try to document best you can. So, you know, whenever somebody's giving you timelines and dates, the farther back in history you go, the more likely that, you know, you could be in error. So these are just time periods that we're looking at. We're specifically looking at the cycles. So we want to know what God is telling us, how these years fit together toward the end. So we have the perfection of the Metonic cycle here. If you don't know what the Metonic cycle is, it's basically the moon, what they found, what Meton, this was like, I think he was a Greek. It might have been around Daniel's day or before, when the Metonic cycle was discovered. Every 19 years, the moon comes around on the same day, in the same spot, in the same phase, in the same day of the year. So that was, they thought that was interesting. It was a great cycle. It was about 19 years long. And they noticed that this was a great cycle. Now, some people also found out that there's a 76-year cycle, the Calippic cycle. It's basically 19 years times 4, which is, I think that's interesting for prophecy because we're actually looking at a 70. If you look here, there's 70, and 2300 is 6 years. So we're also looking at a 76-year period as a final generation time marker. And again, nobody knows the day or the hour, but we're looking at the cycles to see what they mean. Now the 2300 years, how is that the perfection of the Metonic cycle? Well, if you look at it numbers wise and you divide 2,299 years, it's evenly divisible by 19, 121 times, which is 11 times 11. That's what I put 11 squared because I'm a math nerd. But you don't have to say 11 squared. You can say 121 years. So, but that's your 11s marking it. And then in the 2300th year, there's 11 extra days. That's how long it took to accrue 11 extra days. Well, how many days is a lunar year short when it's compared to a solar year? It's short 11 days. So in the 2300th year, it would land perfectly with the solar year. And there wouldn't be hardly any error. There's a couple different astronomers that I've read. One is de Chazot, and there's an Irish astronomer who studies the Daniel cycle. But to put it as simply as I can, God gave Daniel the cycles of the sun and the moon and stitched them together. So what does that mean prophetically? I mean, why do we care when the sun and the moon, come together and match the same day and the same cycle? Why do we even care that? Well, the Bible mentions the sun and the moon standing still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. So it could be that that God gave Daniel a long year time period to tell him when the end of the age would be, because that's when the sun and the moon would stand still. What does this mean, stand still? The word solstice means sun standing. It literally means sol, which equals sun, and stit to make stand, and is the place where the sun literally does pause and change direction at the apex of months of December and June. Now the moon does this every month, has a solstice. And then every 19 years it's at its extreme. So it can go extremely to the left and extremely to the right. So the 19 years is very important when you're looking at the cycles of the sun and the moon and matching them together. Okay, so this chart here is basically looking at 419 years. This is a Callipic cycle. Count the 19s. We got 1 here, 2 here, 3, 4. That's a total of 38 plus 38 is 76 years. So this is the same 70 years I showed you in the previous chart. It's the lunar epoch of 2300 years. It's 70 years. So, and then if you add on the final 2300 days, that gives you 76 years, which I have here. And I believe this is probably the final generation. I'm kind of calling it the last wilderness because in the wilderness we see this number 19 and we don't see it outright. You have to read here. You have to do a little bit of math. It says Numbers 14:29. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you according to your whole number from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. So that means if you were 19 and younger, you weren't going to die. So this is telling the people there's a 19-year cycle, I think. And it also matches the cycle of the moon. Now the reason I have 2024/2025 is because I'm marking the entire year, because there's 12 months in a year. So if you start in the spring of 2024, don't start in January. You start in about March. You start in the spring with the solar equinox. That's the first day of the ancient Hebrew calendar. And it would end in 2025 around March. So March 19th probably. So that is, again, not giving dates, just looking at the timelines and the cycles and seeing how they fit in to what God gave Daniel. Now, the third part of these days is the 1290 days and the 1335. And this is mentioned in the book of Daniel. So Daniel bases everything on the statue. And the statue it's really simple. It's all the kingdoms that ruled over Jerusalem. So in the beginning, they were worldwide kingdoms like Babylon and Persia, Medes and Persians. Greece here is Alexander the Great. Okay, he didn't live very long, and his kingdom was divided into 4. So this is Clarence Larkin's drawing. So I'm kind of using his drawing, but I don't agree with the writing that it's the Roman Empire. Rome did rule over Jerusalem, but the Ottoman Empire took it from Rome in about 636, 688 AD. So when they took it, it did not go to the church. That is incorrect. The church never ruled over Israel. This statue is specifically Gentile rulers over the land of Israel. And you can't forget the Ottoman Empire. They ruled over that entire Mediterranean. They were basically a world power and conquered the then known world. So they're the legs of iron. So Rome is not the legs of iron. Okay? The Rome is actually, they're the thighs are actually brass when you read the scriptures. So anyway, if you count the timeline, I got a little sidetracked. If you start with 603 BC, and again, you got to subtract 1 when you go to AD, okay? You go 1290 years plus 1260, that's 2550 years, takes you to 1948. Again, now we've got a really interesting marker, and we've already gone through 70 years since 1948. And when you also look at the 1335, if you count from the middle of this long time period, it takes you to about 2023, 2024. Now I put a little tilde there, and that means about. And the reason I put the tilde in there is because I don't know exactly when they put the Dome of the Rock, when they built it, but it was around 688 AD, so that takes you to around 2023, 2024, possibly 2025. So it's very interesting how all of these timelines are ending around 2025. Again, it depends on what date you start with. So if you start with a different date, you're going to get a different date. So that's up to you if you want to start with the same dates I did. So putting it all together, we got the cycles of 7, the 2300 days, which are the Metonic cycles, cycles of 19, and the 1290 plus 1260 and the 1335. I've condensed it all in this lovely little chart. Isn't it lovely? Okay. Take 1 day, it equals 1 year. So we have the grand total here, 2520, 7 times 360. Well, I didn't combine them all on this. I just combined the 1200 and these periods of 7 here, the 2300 and the 1290 and the 1260 and the 1335, because they all end about here, and you have about 75 plus or minus 1. The reason I put plus or minus 1 is because that's the margin of error. Because you're talking about thousands of years here, there could be a lot of error there. Oh, I see the chat. I have chat. Look at this. Hey, Mind for Knowledge. Hey, Promised Land, Parting, Red Sea, Orbital Path of Objects. Cheryl Miles says, hey. Good to see everyone. Sun, 11-year cycle, minimum max. Lance Pylon says, so good to see you back. And Mind for Knowledge says, 7 sun cycles equals 77. Yeah, there's some cycles going on here, and I'm sorry I didn't see the chat. I didn't know if I had anybody in the chat. Hopefully I'm not like delaying or anything. Sometimes there's a delay from when I say it and it broadcasts. So if I watch the broadcast, let me see. Yeah, there's like a 30-second delay. So anyway, this is a cool chart. This chart tells you basically all the days of Daniel. And if you're counting them as days, then the final generation, if days equals 2.5 months. So this little period here would be 2.5 months. And again, that's subjective. And if it's years, it's 76. So that is a neat. Here's another comparison. It's kind of the same thing I was just saying. The 2550. Whoa, I didn't mean to do that. Get back on there. 2550, 1335, 2300. The 2595 years, which is 1260 plus 1335, has a 76-year epact. So that's very interesting because we're looking at probably a final 76 years. And then the final thing that I wanted to mention, and I have no idea how long this video is. Let's see if I can look at the, I don't know how long I've been talking. A lot of people talk about the creation week, and it's a very interesting week. God made it so it would be a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. So when he did this week, I believe 1,000 years is a day. So these days were very long to us, only a day for the Lord. And he did the recreation of the earth after the overthrow of it, and from verse 2 of Genesis. So you got, he recreated the light, and so he's got the earth spinning back on its axis. The rain, the land, the zodiac, the fish, the fowl. Then day 6, man is created. Okay, and then that is the sign that Christ would come on the 6th day from creation. From the creation of Adam. Sorry, I had to correct myself. Because what happens here is you have day 6, man is created, and this is all different kinds of man. I believe he created them all over the earth. And I believe on the 8th day, which you see here, is 5000 BC, is when he created the farmer, and I think his name was Adam. So I restart the chart down here, 5000 BC with Adam, because Christ said, I am the last Adam. So if he created man on day 6, that means that's a sign of when Christ is going to come at the first advent. And once you figure that out, you can figure out the second advent. Because he says, I'm going to come on the 3rd day and rebuild my temple. We read that earlier on in the video. He says, I'm going to return in 3 days and build this temple. So let's count from 1 AD, the 6th day, 1, so that would be day 1, day 2 would be here, and day 3 would be after 2000 AD. So I could put a little tilde there because I don't have an exact date, but we have a time period. Granted, it's a 1,000-year time period, but when you combine it with the other studies, you can get more specific than that. But it's interesting how, and some of you might be saying 5000 BC, that's not when he was created in 4000 BC. Well, actually, when you look at the Septuagint, it's about 1,000 years older than the Masoretic timelines. So you have Adam actually being created in 5000 BC. And when you look at these timelines and you compare them, it just makes way more sense. You don't have like them all jammed up and living all at the exact same time like you do in the Masorah or the King James. The King James is from a certain set of scriptures, and there's nothing wrong with those manuscripts. God made sure that the Bible came to us in 2 separate streams. Okay? It came to us through the Septuagint stream, and it came to us through the Masoretic stream. And they're very different text, but at the same time they're almost identical in most of the passages of the Bible. So having these 2 separate streams, they're like double witnesses. And the difference that you can verify the things that are not different by using these 2 separate streams. So they both have their they both make the Bible verifiable when you look at the 2 separate streams. So that's why I like to look at the Septuagint. And when you look at the Patriarch's timeline, the Septuagint has it spread out so that the father has the son, and then the father dies, and then that father has a son, and then that father dies. It's spaced out properly, like you would expect each generation to, especially way back then when they didn't have diseases and die early and that kind of thing. You would expect them to have the father die before the son, not the son die before the father. So in the Masoretic, the son is always dying before the father. And then there are other inconsistencies in that timeline. So when you look at this timeline, you've got Christ coming exactly on that 6th day. So the creation week is laid out, and the reason it's laid out like that is to give us a sign. So I'm going to look. I see a couple more people commenting. Hi from Redding, California. Hi, Ann Kirby. And Mind for Knowledge says hi. And Spectra 9 says, you back? I'm back. I'm going to try to do like 7 to 8. Maybe Thursday night. Tonight's Thursday, so maybe Thursday's my day. I've been doing some private chats, and I know that that's not fair to you guys because it's on Facebook, and I don't particularly want to give away my identity, but, you know, maybe one day I will. So I got to get back on here and do that. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I have no idea how long that went. And I haven't done it in so long, I couldn't even figure out how to start my stupid OBS software, and I had to look it up on YouTube. And look at me in my glasses. Yeah. So, yeah, I need to start doing some more lives, and I can see the chat now. I just really want to do this. I want to do more studies on what's going on right now. So I'll give you a little heads up on what I'm going to do. The next one is going to be about Jacob's trouble and Joseph's dream. Okay, because Joseph had a dream, and he dreamed that 11 of his brothers were going to bow down to him, and the sun and the moon, which is mother and his father. They were all going to bow down to him, and so they sold him into slavery. But God said, I sent a man out before you, before the famine, and before anything bad would happen. I sent him out before you to protect you, to protect all of you, all of Israel, to protect, to provide, to feed, over and above. So we are in the time of Jacob's trouble, but there's going to be a time when we're going to get that relief, when we find out that God has sent a man out before us, before all of the trouble. We got to get through the trouble, and then we're going to have a brief reprieve before the Lord finally returns, and the tribulation of the false Christ happens, because the false Christ is coming first to trick everybody. He's basically going to say, I brought you peace, and I brought you happiness, and I brought you all this stuff. Oh, you like that study? Thank you. So that's the study that I want to do next, and I'm probably going to do it, I'm thinking either Wednesday or Thursday night, probably Thursday night, and do it from about 7 o'clock. So I'm going to try to set up my stream so that it pops up so that you see it's coming that day. And then I can just pop on at the end of the day when I'm ready to go. So it'll have like a little countdown, or you can click notify me when she goes live. So that's what I was thinking. Thank you guys for coming, even though I haven't been on in like 6 months. I've been doing a lot of studies. I need to get back on YouTube and keep everybody going. And don't worry about it, because God is He's going to provide for this country. I have no doubt. No doubt in my mind, and He's going to protect us. So we just need to know those scriptures. So we'll go through those scriptures together so we can know them all. Hope you all have a great night. God bless. Oh, I got one more chat here. Something interesting every day. Halley's Comet travels around the sun every 76 years. Oh, I didn't know that. Saturn also has a 6-sided storm on it. I didn't know that. It's like shaped like a hexagon, I think. And Pastor thought, I think, in one of his studies, talked about the storm NASA saw on Saturn. Yeah. Um, wow, I have to look at that Halley's Comet thing, because I think the 76 years is extremely significant. And Mind for Knowledge says, thanks for sharing. I learned something new. God bless. Okay, yeah, bless. And let's hang in there and know that God is going to bless over and above. Because Jacob's trouble, think about how Jacob felt. Everybody around him told him that it was over. You know, here's the coat with your son's blood on it. He's dead. And now we're all going to die in a famine. It's over. You know, that's... Jacob had a choice. He could either believe the dream that God gave his son, that everything was going to be great and fine, or he could believe everybody around him, his family, telling him otherwise. So I feel like we're kind of in that same situation where we have a choice. We believe, have faith in what is written, or just believe what, you know, we can see, which you might not be able to see yet, the provision that's coming. So, okay. Thank you all. Have a good night. I'm going to stop streaming here.